Forgiveness, a tool of renewal. Anti-Savanainen. Everyone has had some experience of deeds and words that have caused sorrow for oneself or someone else. This is also true in my case. Decades ago, I was a subject of an attack. Each time I thought about what had happened, my mind was filled with negative emotions and thoughts of revenge. Little by little, this spiral of negativity came to an end. It was easy to see that the bitter emotions were causing suffering only for me. This unpleasant process can be seen in a positive light, since I learned something about what happens if one does not forgive. I will discuss forgiveness first from the point of view of scientific research. Then I will explore the perspectives provided by Theosophy and Anthroposophy. Finally, I will briefly address 2 ways to implement forgiveness in practice. Scientific research on forgiveness. The definition of forgiveness can vary in scientific studies. It can mean giving up negative feelings or showing goodwill to an offender. On the other hand, unforgiveness is associated with feelings of resentment, hostility, anger, and hatred toward the offender. In one study, people were asked to think about someone who had hurt, mistreated, or offended them. As they were reminiscing, the researcher monitored their blood pressure, heart rate, and other physiological factors. Recalling a grudge had measurable stressful effects. Not forgiving burdens the immunity system and can make someone more prone to disease. Forgiveness has also been found to have a positive effect on relationships within a family, as well as in professional contexts. There is a very strong relationship between forgiveness and well-being in marriages, which is easy to accept in the light of everyday experience. The good news is that it is possible to learn forgiveness. Research suggests that this is possible even in severe cases. This is not necessarily easy, but it has potential for healing whole nations, as was beautifully demonstrated by Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu in South Africa. Spiritual perspectives on forgiveness. The late Russian anthroposophist Sergei Prokofiev wrote a remarkable book called The Occult Significance of Forgiveness. Based on the anthroposophy of Rudolf Steiner, Prokofiev's book contains profound and inspiring examples of the power of forgiveness. According to both anthroposophy and theosophy, the human entity consists of both a lower self and a higher self. Forgiveness fills the lower self with forces emanating from the higher self. The lower self may resist this process, but this tendency can be overcome with the help of the higher self, from whose point of view forgiveness is very easy and self-evident. Indeed, Prokofiev says, the higher self is in constant process of forgiving the lower self. Prokofiev maintains that breaking the inner laws of life subjects the individual to karma, which is implemented by a vast number of hierarchical beings acting in the invisible cosmos. Genuine forgiveness and voluntarily renouncing compensation liberate the forces of the higher hierarchies. According to Theosophy, the law of karma is inevitable, just as natural laws are. From the spiritual perspective, most if not all bad things that happen to us are consequences of our transgressions in this or a past life. In this sense, karma is beneficent, as it allows us to become free from the past. Indeed, the Finnish theosophist Pekka Urvas called it a blessing in disguise. Madame H.P. Blavatsky writes about the relationship between karma and forgiveness in The Key to Theosophy. Quote starts, "We cannot recommend too strongly mercy, charity, and forgiveness of mutual offenses. But a man who, believing in karma, still revenges himself and refuses to forgive every injury, thereby rendering good for evil, is a criminal and only hurts himself, as karma is sure to punish the man who wronged him, by seeking to inflict an additional punishment on his enemy, who instead of leaving that punishment to the great law adds to it his own might, only begets thereby a cause for the future reward of his own enemy and a future punishment for himself." As we have seen, there are excellent scientific and spiritual grounds for forgiveness. But how can we put it into practice? I will briefly discuss 2 approaches. Quote ends. Magic words. Finnish psychotherapist Tulikki Saaristo presents a simple exercise in her book Magic Words, Why Forgive? The exercise is done in the evening while waiting for sleep. One silently says the following words for a few times: I will forgive myself. If another person comes to mind while performing the exercise, one pronounces their name and says, I will forgive you for a few times. These words are said lightly, without forcing. It might come as a surprise that forgiveness begins with forgiving oneself. This is similar to self-compassion, which involves a kind and warm attitude toward oneself. Saristo notes that many people criticize themselves. This is a learned habit, which can be altered by practicing forgiveness. Many find it easier to be compassionate toward other people than themselves. The mind may generate counterarguments, such as, I can never forgive this person, or I cannot forgive, because this person hasn't apologized to me. Saristo points out that unforgiveness is an emotional hook, which is our creation and to which the other person is only superficially connected. It takes two people to hold on, but it takes only one person to let go. One can start practicing forgiveness even if one does not feel like it at all. Forgiveness is a mystery that cannot be understood before one starts trying it out. Saristo's approach to forgiveness, as well as the esoteric Christian perspective on forgiveness and the spiritual path in general, are discussed in Mori Latavirta's book The Yoga of Jesus. The Forgiveness Deal. Richard Smoley is an American author, editor, and expert on esoteric Christianity. He provides a detailed approach to forgiveness in his book The Deal, a guide to radical and complete forgiveness. Smoley states that forgiveness is the greatest deal one can ever make, and it takes only about half an hour. I will provide here a brief introduction to Smoley's method. A totally personal and private process. It starts with a mindfulness practice and reaching for a heart consciousness. When the preparatory phase has been concluded, one is ready to inspect one's own life, faults, and imperfections. The central question is the following: do I want to be freed from these things? If the answer is positive on all counts, one can move on to the next phase. This is about extending the act of release to other people and eventually the whole world. The central question here is, do I want to forgive this person or these persons? If the answer to either of these questions is no, one can end the practice here, and if appropriate, return to it at another point. For Smoley, the deal is a matter of radical and complete forgiveness in that one accepts forgiveness for all of one's actions in exchange for forgiving all the offenses of others. He emphasizes that it is an all-or-nothing deal. If one withholds forgiveness even from one person, the whole process is voided. Smoley contends that this is a purely practical matter. If even a little room is left for a grievance, all the others will soon come rushing back in. Once the deal is successfully concluded, a strong feeling of euphoria can follow. One might be tempted to make radical changes in his or her life in this state of mind. But Smoley warns the practitioner not to act too hastily and to allow at least a few days for digesting and integrating the process. He also recommends care when talking to other people about the deal, especially those who are directly concerned. Final thoughts. Now we can summarize the reasons why forgiveness is a very beneficial tool of renewal. First, it is extremely useful for oneself. As Smoley aptly notes in The Deal, not forgiving is like drinking poison and expecting it to hurt the offender. Second, it is clear from scientific studies and everyday experience that forgiving has benefits for personal well-being. Third, forgiving has deep karmic consequences. Certainly, there will always be incidents in life that arouse irritation and sometimes bitterness in us. Practicing forgiveness frees us from the burden of anger and grudges until we learn the great lesson of how to overcome evil without fighting. Learning to forgive helps us find compassion and love toward ourselves, other people, and eventually to all sentient beings. This is the end of the article on forgiveness published in Esoterica, Theosophical Society in English.